it's Seraphina. Tonight I'm going to share a story about youth and the strange, intense emotions that come with it. It's about a close friend of mine, someone who struggled with the uncertainty of desire, trying to find his place in a world that often felt too chaotic, too demanding. This story is a reminder that the path to self-understanding is rarely straightforward, and that it's okay to feel lost along the way. Before we begin, please remember to subscribe and follow if you haven't already. I love sharing these reflective stories with you, and your support means so much to me. Now, let's take a deep breath, get comfortable, and dive into this tale together. This story is about my friend Marco. Marco was always the kind of person who felt everything too deeply. Even as a child, his emotions seemed to consume him, and the line between joy and sadness was often blurred. He had this restlessness about him, a need to understand things that didn't have easy answers. As we grew up, that restlessness only intensified, manifesting in a kind of longing that seemed to stretch beyond the limits of words. In our teenage years, I noticed how Marco's energy seemed to fluctuate like the changing of seasons. There were moments when he was full of life, when his laughter filled the room, and then there were days when he seemed distant, as though trapped in his own thoughts, somewhere I couldn't reach. The first time I noticed something was really shifting in Marco was during one summer, just after we had both turned 16. It was a time when everything seemed to be changing, and not just for him. We were both feeling the pull of adolescence, that confusing in-between place where we were no longer children, yet still not quite adults. For Marco, these changes were overwhelming. He began to feel emotions he didn't know how to express, a mixture of curiosity, anxiety, and an inexplicable longing that kept him awake at night. He started spending more time alone, going for long walks late in the evening when the streets were quiet and the world seemed to belong only to him. I would often see him from my window, wandering aimlessly as though searching for something he couldn't name. One night, he finally opened up to me. We were sitting on the front steps of my house, the cool night air settling around us, when Marco turned to me with a look I had never seen before. There was a rawness in his eyes, a vulnerability that made my heart ache. "I don't know what's happening to me," he confessed, his voice barely a whisper. "It's like there's something inside me that's unraveling. I don't even know how to explain it." I listened as he spoke, unsure of what to say. He described feeling overwhelmed by emotions that didn't seem to have a source, moments of sudden joy, followed by deep sadness, a sense of wanting something desperately but not knowing what it was. It was as if the world around him was shifting in ways he couldn't quite understand, and it left him feeling lost, adrift. As the months passed, Marco's internal struggle seemed to intensify. He became more withdrawn, retreating further into himself. There were days when he wouldn't show up to meet our friends, days when he would skip class just to wander the city alone. He told me once that he liked the feeling of getting lost, of being anonymous in a crowd of strangers. It gave him a sense of freedom, he said, a break from the expectations and pressures that seemed to suffocate him. But I could see the toll it was taking on him. Marco was always searching for something, some kind of answer to a question that even even he didn't fully understand. He began to immerse himself in art, in literature, in anything that seemed to resonate with the feelings he couldn't put into words. It was around this time that Marco developed a crush on someone, a boy named Luca. Luca was older, more confident, and seemed to embody everything Marco felt he wasn't. It wasn't just about attraction. There was something more, something deeper that drew Marco to him. But this feeling, too, was confusing for Marco. It was one thing to admire someone from afar, but another to confront the emotions that came with it, especially when those emotions defied everything he thought he understood about himself. Marco confided in me one afternoon, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and hope. "I don't know if it's real," he said. "I don't even know if I'm allowed to feel this way. It's just, I can't stop thinking about him. It's like he's become a part of my thoughts, even when I don't want him to be." I didn't know how to respond, so I just listened. There was no judgment in my heart, only a deep wish for Marco to find peace with himself, to understand that it was okay to feel what he was feeling, even if it was confusing. The following weeks were filled with highs and lows for Marco. There were moments when he seemed happier, lighter, as though he had finally found a piece of himself that had been missing. But then there were other days when the uncertainty returned, when he was consumed by doubt and the fear that he was somehow wrong for having these feelings. He told me once that it felt like living two lives at the same time, one where he could be true to himself, and another where he felt the need to hide, to pretend that everything was fine. It was exhausting for him, and the weight of it all seemed to push him further into that quiet place of longing and confusion. I remember a particularly difficult night when Marco called me, his voice heavy with despair. He had seen Luca with someone else, laughing and carefree, and it broke something inside him. "I'm such a fool," he said, his words laced with pain. Why did I let myself feel this way?" I rushed over to his place, and when I arrived, he was sitting on the floor of his bedroom, surrounded by sketches and pages of writing, his attempt to make sense of it all, to find some kind of release in the art that had always been his solace. We talked for hours that night about love, about fear, about the ways we all struggle to understand ourselves. I didn't have the answers he was looking for, but I hoped that my presence was enough, that he knew he wasn't alone in his confusion. As time went on, Marco slowly began to come to terms with his emotions. It wasn't a quick or easy process, but gradually he started to understand that there was nothing wrong with feeling deeply, with being uncertain. He learned to accept that the intensity of his emotions was simply part of who he was, and that it didn't have to be something to fear. Marco continued to explore his art, and through it he found a way to express the emotions he had struggled to articulate for so long. His drawings became more vivid, his poetry more honest. It was as though he was finally letting the world see the parts of himself that he had kept hidden for so long. I saw Marco recently, and there was a calmness in him that hadn't been there before. He had come to embrace the fact that life isn't always clear-cut, that desire and longing don't always come with easy answers. He had learned to find beauty in the uncertainty, to to see the value in his journey of self-discovery, even if it had been painful at times. We sat together on the steps of my house, just like we used to, and he spoke with a sense of peace I hadn't heard in his voice before. "I don't have it all figured out," he said, "but I don't think I need to anymore. I'm learning to live in the questions. Take a deep breath in and let it out." Thank you for joining me tonight and for listening to Marco's story. It's a reminder that the journey to understanding ourselves is rarely simple, and that it's okay to feel lost sometimes. What matters is that we keep moving forward, keep searching, and learn to accept the parts of ourselves that make us who we are. Until next time, sweet dreams, lovely friend. Good night, Seraphina.